the college football schedule, at least in the Big Ten, kind of unveiling here. We had the big release day of the Big Ten schedule during the course of last week. And so now we need to talk about who won the lottery of the schedule release. Big picture thoughts on this thing is that these things are wildly imbalanced. And we know this, and this is not, excuse me, look at me, I'm dropping my pen. This is not unique to the Big Ten. This is every single conference, and this is the era of super conferences. We're going to have really imbalanced schedules. Now, the obvious culprit is the size of the conference themselves, and that's kind of, obvious, like I said. And there's not a ton that you can do that gets around kind of the imbalance of the schedule. I would be a proponent that you keep a couple of opponents that are your natural rivals, which everybody has tried to do to try to retain some of that traditional nature of college football. But then after that, I would be in favor of schedules, even in conferences, not just out of conference, but in conference, that slated you based on where you finished the previous year. And so the teams that need help get help with an easier conference schedule. And the teams that we think are better teams and that succeeded in the previous year would get more difficult schedules. Now, that's not exactly what happened with this one. It is more random. So because of that randomness, it does feel a little bit like a lottery. So you've got the size of the conference that obviously impacts this thing. And then again, the selection-based playoff model that we currently operate under in the CFP, it affects schedules. And what we have right now are schedules that reflect a selection-based model and a selection committee that is going to honor wins regardless of who they come against. I think that's a problem. And it also just contributes to this imbalance that we see. So you can do one of two things now as a program in college football. You can take the risk and you can schedule a great opponent in the non-conference. And we've seen some of those, and they've been fantastic. Michigan, Oklahoma played last year. Obviously, Ohio State and Texas played last year. Both of those teams are going to play at the opposite location this year. Oklahoma at Michigan, Ohio State at Texas. Those programs kept those matchups on their schedule. But when you do that, all of a sudden, you start fighting with fire here. Playing with fire, I think, is the term. You take a massive risk because that conference schedule, it can go any direction. And if you hit it wrong, now all of a sudden you're behind the eight ball. And that schedule top to bottom becomes incredibly difficult. And we actually saw that this year. More on that in a little bit. I've got my three what I would call like best schedule lottery schedules. I've got my three worst schedule lottery schedules from the Big Ten. That's all coming up. In this era, I do think like we need to get to these NFL-based schedules just because the imbalance is great. And if there is going to be an imbalance, I'm a big believer that you try to drive toward, not completely, but drive toward parity. Parity has entered college football in a big way. Indiana just won the national championship. And if we want to retain that, I think that we can do some work in the schedule to retain that. I think parity is better for the sport. More fan bases are going to feel engaged. More fan bases feel like they've got a chance. That's better for the sport as a whole. Okay, so we can do that. The way it is now, though, you've got these schedules, you've got these non-conference schedules, you've got the lottery of the conference schedule. Well, that basically means that outside of the games themselves, really the two most important days, and I would argue the two most important days of the entire offseason, are the day the transfer portal closes and you see what your roster is going to look like, and the day the schedule is released in your conference, so you actually see the lottery that you got and where you're going and when. These 2 days directly impact what you're going to see from a wins and losses perspective in the fall. There's no greater influence than those 2 days. What does your roster look like? What schedule are you playing? And I know that that's somewhat obvious, but that it just goes to show you this is not a throwaway thing. You take a look at these schedules, in particular in this conference, which we'll talk about today in the Big Ten, they are wildly different. And that's why I call it the schedule lottery. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the easiest schedules, the ones that they hit, baby. This is Jackpot City. I have got 3-1, my top 3 schedule lottery hits in the Big Ten. Let's start with number 3. I think number 3 is Iowa. Iowa got a pretty darn good schedule. First and foremost, Their big non-conference game is Iowa State, and Iowa State was decimated when they lost their coach, Matt Campbell. He goes to Penn State, and the entire roster basically left. So that's their tough non-conference game, and now it doesn't look so tough, does it? By the way, that game's also in Kinnick. They've got Northern Illinois, Northern Iowa. Then there's this slate right there. You hit the end of September and into October, and you think to yourself like, oh, man, this is really difficult. And it is, and it is. And here's the thing. In these super conferences, you're never going to totally avoid tough matchups, but it matters where they occur, and it matters when they occur, and then in particular, what's around it. So I already told you about that non-conference slate. Then all of a sudden they go at Michigan on September 26th, and then home to Ohio State on October 3rd. You could look at that and you could be like, well, dang, they've got Michigan and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks, which is true. By the way, they follow this up with a trip to Washington. Not an easy place to play. You could stop there and think to yourself, man, Iowa's got a tough schedule. But wait, there's a bye. Then they're at Minnesota, Wisconsin, at Northwestern, Purdue, at Illinois, and Nebraska. I don't see another top 6 team in the conference on that list. To me, that is a schedule lottery win for Iowa. If they can get through that slate of their first 5, which includes Michigan and Ohio State, maybe with just 2 losses. And then if they can win at Washington, and now all of a sudden you're staring at a 10-win season because the back half of your schedule is not entirely unmanageable. So again, Iowa, I thought they hit a bit of the schedule lottery, even though it could seem to the layman just looking at it like it was going to be very difficult. Number 2, Illinois. Illinois hit the schedule lottery in this one. And again, you look at this and you think to yourself, well, Joel, hold on. They've got to play Ohio State on the road, and they've got to play Oregon. Yep, they sure do, but it matters when they happen, and then it matters what happens around them. So Duke is on the non-conference schedule for Illinois. They lost their quarterback. Now, that's a different team without their quarterback. You've got Purdue right after you go to Ohio State. That's, I think, manageable. Maryland right after Oregon. Traveling out to Maryland, that's manageable. And then the only other really tough game that you could say like, well, this might be a top 7 or 8 team in the conference is Iowa. So yes, you have Ohio State, you have Oregon, but really the only other tough game is going to be Iowa. They've got that one at home. By the way, they're home against Oregon, which means for Illinois, really their toughest test on the road is at Ohio State, even if you lose that one. Now you've got Oregon at home, you've got Iowa at home. It's really not a tough slate. So Illinois hitting a bit of that schedule jackpot here in the Big Ten. So number 3, Iowa. Number 2, Illinois. But the best schedule in the Big Ten. Yes, the jackpot winner. They hit the lottery, folks. And that is new head coach Matt Campbell and the Penn State Nittany Lions. This thing is not difficult. It just isn't at all. First of all, they don't have much in the non-conference. Marshall, at Temple, and Buffalo. That's obviously manageable, even for a new coach. Remember, they brought in, what was it? I think 20 Iowa State transfers. It might feel a lot like Iowa State, but I tell you this about Matt Campbell and Iowa State. They were a good program. They've got Rocco Becht at quarterback. He's going to be the most experienced quarterback in college football with 39 starts. That matters. That matters in this day and age. We've talked about it a little bit, and I think that that's something that certainly can help you, in particular early in a season, but more specifically late in the playoff. And we'll see if Penn State can get there. I can tell you this, their schedule is going to help them. They've got Buffalo, like I said, then Wisconsin at Northwestern, and then they really get the teeth of their schedule. And the teeth of their schedule happens in October. They're going to host USC. Now, this is a USC team that has not played well on the road, in particular in the Big Ten. In particular, against quality opponents. You saw what happened last year against Notre Dame. Jeremiah Love ran for, I think it was an Irish record at home, like 229 or something, 226. The very next week, they have to go to Michigan, and those are the 2 toughest games that they have by a wide margin. Then they have a bye week. Then they go Purdue, at Washington, Minnesota, Rutgers, and at Maryland. So they only face 2 of what I would categorize as the top 6 teams in the conference. It happens in October. One of them is at home. By the way, your lone really tough game on the road is Michigan. They've got a brand new coach. This is the absolute schedule lottery in the Big Ten. Penn State, I don't know if their team is going to be a 10-win team, but their schedule is a potential 10-win schedule. And that is exactly how I would want it. Man, if you would have known this schedule before this hiring process, guys would have clamored to take the Penn State job. Not that they didn't. They got a great candidate with Matt Campbell, but as you know, it took a little bit of time. But if you knew it was this schedule, you would have been like, yep, let's go. Giddy up. So Penn State hit the schedule lottery. They have got the best schedule in the Big Ten as I see it. All right, now we got to talk about, well, I did consider Wisconsin and Michigan State. Both of those teams, I kind of ranked the Big Ten like 1 to 8, 1 to 7 or 8. And of the top 6 teams, Michigan State and Wisconsin only play 2 of them. So Michigan State plays at Michigan, they play Oregon. But the difficult part is they've got a game at Notre Dame, so I don't like that schedule. Wisconsin, similarly, only 2 of what I would categorize as the top 6 in the conference, USC and who else was it? Penn State. They also have a trip at Iowa. They also have Notre Dame. So schedules that are manageable, there's no doubt, but the Notre Dame non-conference game did not let them get into my 3 easiest schedules in the Big Ten for those reasons. Now we get to the teams that really lost this lottery and have the hardest schedules in the Big Ten. And we start with number 3. They're going to play 3 playoff teams on the road. Their bye week happens in week 2, which means they play 11 straight games in consecutive weeks because there's not multiple bye weeks this year based on when this season starts. I'm talking about Northwestern. With new offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, Northwestern has an absolute bear of a schedule. By the way, their opener is not easy. South Dakota State, that's a really good program. Then they have a bye week, an off week. And then Colorado comes to town. They will open Ryan Field with Colorado. But they've got at Indiana, they host Penn State, they've got at Oregon, Iowa at home, at Ohio State. Wow. Like that is not easy at all. That's 5 of the top 7 or 8 teams in the conference right there. Northwestern, that is a very difficult schedule. You look at that road for them at Indiana, at Oregon, at Ohio State. Those are probably going to be the 3 best teams in the conference. They're the 3 playoff teams from last year, and they have to play them on the road. So Northwestern, they lost the schedule lottery in a big way. They're my 3rd hardest schedule in the Big Ten after this schedule release. Now we go to number 2. Number 2, they play 4, really 5 teams in my, I would say, top 7 and 8 in the Big Ten, and a monster in the non-conference, Michigan. Michigan has a monster schedule. Michigan, September 12th, is going to welcome Oklahoma. September 26th, they're going to welcome Iowa. They've got Penn State at home. They've got Indiana at home. Then they've got to still, in the month of November, go to Oregon and to Ohio State. I talked about, like, when games happen. They've got to go to Oregon and Ohio State, both in November. So, incredibly difficult schedule, and this is what happens. So, not only is their conference slate tough, they've got to face Iowa, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State, but they've got Oklahoma as well. Let's go back to what I was talking about. You run the risk, if you keep that tough non-conference game on your schedule, of hitting the conference lottery wrong, which happened to Michigan right here. And now you look at this, and even with a really good team, you're like, man, we better stay healthy in order to get to 9, maybe 10 wins. So I think Kyle Whittingham is a hell of a hire. I love what they did in building their roster, and I hate their schedule. And there's a few of these that you just can't overcome. Now, Oklahoma was able to overcome it last year, and granted, they got some teams that were down. And so if you're Michigan and you're a Michigan fan, you're going to hope that it doesn't work out for Matt Campbell and Penn State. You're going to hope that Oklahoma is on a hangover after losing in the playoff and that they're not very good, that Josh Hoover doesn't work out at Indiana, that somehow all that experience at Oregon is not going to be there, and that the depth at Ohio State is run through by the time that the season comes to an end. I mean, that's what your hope is, because if you just play all those teams at full strength, that schedule becomes as difficult as any. But it's not as difficult as my number one hardest schedule in the Big Ten after this conference schedule release, the loser of the conference schedule lottery, and that's Ohio State. Ohio State, by a wide margin, has what I would consider to be the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. So this is what happens all before November for the Ohio State Buckeyes. At Texas, that's going to be a top 5 team. At Iowa, Kinnick is one of the most difficult places to play in college football, and certainly has been for Ohio State at times, and every quality team in the Big Ten. At Indiana, that is the defending national champion, with a team that we think, at least I think, is still going to be very good based on the way that they built their roster after the transfer portal window. At USC, again, this is all pre-November. Texas, Iowa, Indiana, USC, all on the road. Then in November, they've got to face Oregon and Michigan. Granted, those are at home, but that schedule is daunting. You've got Indiana, Oregon. Those two teams could start the year 1-2, maybe 1-3 in the country. USC is going to be knocking on the door in the top 10. Michigan was in my top 10. Texas was in my top 10. And Iowa certainly will be a top 25 team. So Ohio State, man, I tell you what, I'm concerned about depth for them. I'm concerned about depth for Michigan. But when I looked at after the portal closed and the dust settled for Ohio State, listen, there was a lot of movement. And I know that they didn't lose their key stars, but they lost a lot of depth pieces and guys that I would have looked at on the roster and thought to myself, man, he's going to be a key piece to that team. Now, I know that they brought a lot of guys in as well, and I think that they really like what they brought in. But depth could be an issue. As we've seen in college football, if you don't stay healthy, it is too difficult right now because the talent has dispersed. You can't stockpile talent. Not even Ohio State can stockpile the talent. And with a gauntlet like that, they're going to have to stay healthy. They're going to have to keep their quarterback healthy. They invested in their own offensive linemen. They're going to have to try to run the football. More on that in a little bit. And that, again, that's a really, really difficult schedule. Let's just take the two teams that were the easiest and toughest from the schedule lottery that I had here in the Big Ten. So you've got Penn State and Ohio State. Let's just play a little bit of a thought exercise here, and let's just replace each team's entire schedule. And you start to think of what their record might be if they had the opponent's schedule. Let's start with Penn State. You look at Penn State and their schedule, and you think to yourself, man, 2 really tough games, one of them at home. I kind of like them. I think they certainly have 9 wins on that schedule and possibly 10, maybe 11. Could be a good year in Happy Valley in the first year for Matt Campbell. Rocco Becht, he's experienced. Boy, I really like it. I can talk myself into that roster, which has question marks, based on the schedule. Now flip it. Let's say Penn State played at Texas, at Iowa, at Indiana, at USC, home to Oregon, home to Michigan. If you just replace every opponent, 1 for 1, Ohio State and Penn State on that schedule, I would look at the way that Penn State is currently constructed after the transfer portal window. Again, one of the 2 most important days in the college football year. And I would say, I think they could probably win 6. Hey, maybe 7. Yeah, I think they could get to 7. And man, if it goes incredible, over the moon, maybe even 9. But that would be crazy. That would be crazy. I think a great year for Penn State playing Ohio State's schedule would be 8-4. That would be a big success, wild success. First year for Matt Campbell, wild success. That is a drastic imbalance. You're talking about, in one breath, a team that has the possibility of winning 11 games. And the other, a wild success would be 8, maybe 9 wins, just based on the schedule. So these imbalances are just Wild. And conversely, if Ohio State, the way that they were constructed with a quarterback coming back with Jeremiah Smith on the outside, even with all of the exits that they had to the depth pieces during the course of the transfer portal window, you would look up if they played Penn State's schedule and you'd be like, man, if they're not 11-1, something went terribly wrong. But now, with that schedule, they better stay healthy if they want to get to double digits. So, college football is tough, man. This is why I have argued that we should have a better way to build the schedule. I still believe that at least one game for every school in the Power Four, at a minimum, but in the Power Four, and probably I would take it outside of that, should be scheduled for these teams. One of the non-conference games should be scheduled for them based on where they finished the previous year. One, it would be an incredible boon for television, and you could aggregate those games outside of the current conference television rights packages and sell them back to networks at a premium, because you'd be having games that would get 10, 11, 12 million viewers, and you could raise the revenue in college football. All the while, everybody in college football is dying for revenue. More on that in a little bit. So you get to see, like, right there. Others that I considered for hardest schedules, losing the schedule lottery. USC I considered in there. They've got a really difficult schedule. They're going to welcome Oregon. They've got to go to Penn State. That's probably the whiteout game, I would imagine, because there's really nothing else that Penn State has on their schedule. And you know that USC has not played great on the road, in particular when they got to go all the way back east. They've got Ohio State at home. They've got to go to Indiana. SIG hasn't lost at Indiana at home. Dang, man. So USC is very difficult. I thought about them. I thought about Washington as well. I think Washington's got a tough schedule. They've got to go to USC. They welcome Iowa. They've got Penn State at home. They've got Indiana and at Oregon to finish. Yikes. So you could be having a great year. You're sitting there like, hey, maybe we're going to get to 10 wins. And then boom, Indiana and at Oregon. Good luck. Indiana is not an easy schedule, but their non-conference is, I think, so easy. North Texas, Howard, and Western Kentucky. I know North Texas was good last year, but everybody left. North Texas North at Oklahoma State next year. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.